Well, thank you very much for having me. I couldn't be more excited. Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to speak to you. And, mostly also Echo is homegrown in the Dulles area, right down Route 28. So we were birthed in the recession, essentially, on innovation, so following the themes we talked about. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about kind of disruption and technology. My career's been about disruption. My mother probably could have figured that out by my inability to clean up my room and follow instructions. But essentially, I've spent my life, whether it's the newspaper industry, when I got a chance to start up what's now WashingtonPost.com, or in the early days of the internet with AOL, or in China and Japan when I worked with Yahoo and a number of folks. And so I've always been fascinated by what happens when technology hits traditional industries. And so what I want to talk to you today a little bit about is how internet's going to hit education. My company got started out of a pain point, which was that I had a son with learning difficulties, and he wasn't getting a lot out of the classroom. And at the time, I was actually in the middle of a big media work when the iPhone and the iPad was launching, and I was in a meeting with Jobs and his fellow Masayoshi Son, and it struck me that none of this technology that's used for games and entertainment ever touched a classroom. And I asked the question, why aren't we using it in the classroom? Because my son, loved playing with computers and iPads and all that stuff. So that's kind of how it got birthed. So that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today, and I'm going to walk you through a little what I think are a couple of trends and a little bit about what we're doing, and hopefully inspire some questions. First question I always get asked, we spend most of the time in universities and colleges, but we also do a little bit in K-12, is are universities going to disappear? They're expensive right now, and you can't get a job when you get out. And if you go to Silicon Valley, they would all say, yeah, they're all going to go away. There's going to be 5 teachers out of some famous university, and we're all going to study in our pajamas, and that's going to work. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But the truth is universities they've been around 500 years, college as well, and high schools, and I don't think they're going away. So when you think about disruption, not every industry goes away. Sometimes they kind of morph. And I think the story of education, as you think about your kids and your businesses, this is one of these industries that'll morph, kind of like healthcare. I'm on the board of an insurance company, kind of like insurance. So they don't all disappear overnight like the BlackBerry. Some actually stay around. And so that's good, and it's good for all of you that are in traditional industries. But it is a segment. And Steve Case, who's one of our investors, basically said, the internet's kind of gone through 3 phases. The first phase is the one I was involved in the 90s. That was the infrastructure. That was AOL and literally building out the internet so everything could ride on. And then, right after the end of the decade, the millennial period, it was all about applications, Google and Facebook, and they really were built on a lot of the functions were actually developed 10 years later, but they were built right on the foundation of what was there. And that's kind of what we hear today. But where I think it's growing and maybe relevant for your lives is that this next decade is really about the internet going into everyday business. So when e-commerce is called commerce, you'll know the internet's completely there. And we're getting to those moments. And so I think that's a little bit about education. Think of it as a blend. So I wanted to give you, what I want to talk about today, just quickly, is 3 big trends for maybe to think about that might also apply to your own businesses, but that are really going to hit education over the next 5 years. The first one is something you're all aware, any of you have children, is devices are everywhere. So today in a lot of classrooms, we say they're an average, the new normal is 3 IP addresses. So people are coming in with devices. And if you think about it, a lot of you might have laptops in your schools. They may have iPads. The LA County schools spend $1 billion on iPads, but no software. But we got laptops. So the question is if you're going to go in a classroom and you have a laptop or you have an iPad or you have a phone, why not put software on top of it? This is kind of what a modern classroom is beginning to look like today, a wall of computers. Any of you have ever spoken, you walk in and they're on there. And so what do you think they're actually doing, right? Maybe these 2 are taking notes, I'll give them that. The next group is probably on Facebook or ESPN. In the back, we won't talk about what they're doing. But that is very frustrating for teachers and professors because, there's this constant pull as to whether they're listening to me or not. And so part of what we tried to solve is one of these problems, which is, well, why not let them follow the lecture? Why not let them take notes online? I don't know if you've seen, my kids can barely do handwriting or cursive anymore because they're on it already. Well, they do it on the computer, so why not have it there? And why not be able to ask questions? Because it's actually hard for people to stick up their hands and say, I wasn't paying attention, I'm not so smart, I didn't really understand that. They don't do that, and so this is a big deal. So one of the problems we tried to solve was this particular one, and I'm going to show you, it's at a University of Michigan.
Right here, and you can see a little square of it.
The classroom is completely different. What are we to do in the classroom that takes advantage of the bodies being in the room? I was frustrated by the lack of engagement in my big lecture class. With lecture tools, I started thinking, what do I want them to know right now? Not what do I want to be saying to them, what do I want them to know? So it changed my whole point of view. I took my PowerPoint slides, uploaded them, very simple to do. I'm often removing material from those slides and replacing it with an interactive activity because they have to engage with the material right now. What do you think about this? They're active with the material, they find out what they know, what they don't know. Then I can peek into their minds. I can see what they don't know. It's right there on the screen. Then we can talk about it. The more conventional technology is clickers. You put up a multiple choice question, the students select one of the responses. But that didn't help me with anatomy because what I want to do is show them images and say where on this image is the muscle. The image-based questions where the students can interact with an image. That's everything for me with such a visually intensive course as anatomy. I can ask them about a particular muscle that they're still learning with the free response. They make up anatomical names. I love that because I can see right where they're thinking. They can get rewarded for partial learning, for diving in to the material. It's activating them. Instead of teaching, it's learning. It changes everything for me. Sharing the material, a conversation about the material, which is joyful for me as a professor and much more interesting to them.
So what that's called is active learning. So we talk about, so what are one of the big trends? One is going from passive learning, the lecture, sage on the stage, to active learning. So when you're in it, you're actually asking questions, you're using the devices they're bringing anyways, and you're beginning to do it. And I thought I'd just show you a little bit how it works, just so you can see it. It's going to be hard because of the size of the screen, but what happens is it could be a PowerPoint, it could be anything, it could be a speech, whatever's up there. But the student can actually follow the material while you're actually giving it. And the student can do one of three things when you're doing it, and they can press three buttons. One of them says, hey, this is really important, I like that point, and they push a button and it saves it to a study guide. And then for the whole course, every time they push one of those buttons, which they love pushing buttons, they save it to a study guide. The second thing you can do is if you want to ask a question, you don't understand something, instead of sticking up your hand, you simply type in the question. And you can do that anonymously, so none of the other students know it, or you can do it not anonymously. You can ask the students and the professors. The professors or the teachers can answer it either after the class, during the class, or have a TA do it, whatever works. Start to do it. And when they did that, and Michigan was where it was pioneered, the participation rates went from 3% to 65%. That's just humongous. I mean, so this is using technology the way it is. Then the other button is the I'm confused button, which the professor calls the WTF button. And that's I don't understand. So, I just delivered this slide and someone will come up and say, nice presentation, but no one will tell me. I had no clue what slide 14 was. Well, now you can. So you can do it. The other thing is you take notes, and the notes are automatically time synced, because I don't know about you, but if you actually, college students, high school students, they lose their notes all the time. So now it's all online. The thing about it, we'll talk about data, is every single thing they're doing is now a keystroke, which we can now monitor. So if they're writing Bernoulli's principle, we know it's about Bernoulli's principle. So you're beginning to use the principles that are out there to actually increase the conversation between the teacher and the student, using online. So again, we've moved from fighting with laptops in the classroom to, okay, well, why don't we use them and then put the software in them? So that's one of the big trends. And so it'll go under the words you'll hear a lot in your schools, active learning versus passive learning. This is a little bit about, this is one of the features of it. And this is kind of one of the trends. Where it's been done, a couple of universities, you've seen 3 to 65% increase in engagement. Exam scores up 10%. At Ottawa, failing grades went down 80%. Participation increased 50%. On and on. So it works. And by the way, this isn't technology that you need to get in a decade or two. So if you're in school boards and you want to make changes, the truth is there's a lot of things out there that work today. The second big trend I want to talk about, so the first one was this kind of idea of devices are everywhere, what are you going to do? The second big one is really about online. So a couple of years ago, there was something called MOOCs. Has anyone here heard of MOOCs? They're called massive open online courses. And it came about from the question of the classroom is no longer the classroom anymore. So learning just doesn't take place. Just like your phone, you kind of watch TV on your phone. You used to watch TV on your TV, and your telephone was your telephone, but that's not the case anymore. And it's the same thing in the classroom. Now, is that woman in a laundry room, or is she actually taking an online course? And the truth is, online learning could be the fourth row of a classroom, or it could be right around the corner because it's a remote, it's a community school, or it could be Abu Dhabi. And that has to happen. So every school has to go through it. So in what I call Silicon Valley hype, so this is kind of why I said the movement here is a little bit more evolutionary. MOOCs were everything. Every single school ran to do MOOCs. And MOOCs were basically, you get a professor from Harvard or Stanford, they teach robotics, and 10,000, 30,000 people would study online, and it was the hottest thing you could possibly imagine. The reason it was hot is because it solved all the problems. It would be cheap. You don't need any schools. Everyone could learn in their pajamas, and we would pass knowledge freely. And then about 2 years later, we call the MOOC hysteria, something happened. Only 10% of the people who took the courses completed them. Why? Well, first of all, learning's hard. And second of all, teachers matter. And the truth is people don't easily, if you've ever done an online course and just had, passive lectures, if you're Bill Gates, no problem, but my nephew, it's a problem. So, what works in education is a really good instructor, and technology's role isn't to replace teachers, it's actually to empower them. And whenever you mix that, a teacher plus some technology in that, the academic outcomes go up. So what's moved from what I call MOOCs and all that group is now going to something bigger. And so I'll show you what we call the flipped classroom. So this is another form of active learning where the teacher delivers the lecture before you arrive at class. We can check whether the students have looked at it because it's all online. And then the student, instead of being in class and listening to the person, they're actually engaging with the instructor who's walking around, called flipped classroom. This is online learning. It's a different type of online learning, but I think this is a good example. University of North Carolina Pharmacy did a great piece, and I'll show you a little bit of a video of what they've done, just as an example.
The School of Pharmacy has been using the Echo 360 for about 4 years. We like the ability to capture lecture as well as PowerPoint slides that we would show. And so we started thinking of that technology and that solution as a way to implement the flipped classroom.
The recordings have helped me to really understand the material instead of just hearing it. I can play it until I understand what I'm trying to get out of the material instead of just writing it down.
The research that we undertook was to quantify and evaluate the students' perception, engagement, and performance. The Echo 360 captured lectures that we made and the ability to then engage in active learning in the classroom significantly enhanced outcomes. And we quantify these outcomes, how often they access the captured videos, and we also quantified their performance in class to compare a lot of the metrics from the 2011 course, which was traditional lecture, to the 2012 flipped classroom. The outcome was that the 2012 flipped cohort scored statistically higher than the 2011 cohort. 91% of the students felt like their learning was enhanced by this flipped classroom. 95% of the students felt that the captured video, viewing that before coming into the classroom, enhanced their learning.
By doing the flipped classroom, you're able to relate the material more to reality in real life and the way you're going to apply it in the real world versus just, well, this is A and this is B, memorize it and go take the test.
What we're strongly advocating now is that there is an important role that research-intensive faculty can play to inspire and educate and show students in the classroom through active learning their experiences.
What the flipped classroom is about, again, to go back, is about essentially capturing TiVo, essentially taking TiVo in the classroom, delivering it early and watching it. So that's another big trend in education, which is the classroom's not the classroom, and whether you're delivering online on a Friday because there's no classroom. In California, they can't graduate enough people, so they actually have to have overflow classrooms and they use online. So, and online, I think, applies to all your businesses in the same way. The third piece of it, and the way that works is, again, the same thing, where students look at get the presentation, but this time they actually have a recording or something that's there so they can follow if a professor wants to sit in their room and actually record a particular piece that someone doesn't understand or want to give you information in advance. The third trend I want to talk about is big data. So a lot of you probably use data in your businesses as kind of the new thing, but what's never really been applied is how big data works in a classroom. So today when you go into any classroom, it's analog. There's no trace of what's going on. And so what people are now spending time on is trying to predict which students are in trouble, particularly in schools where graduation rates are an issue, could be with community colleges, a lot of big public universities. They lose the kids in the first 15 days. So by the time they know there's a problem, it's already midterms, it's too late, they're gone. And so how do you know before someone walks in how to do it? Well, you know if you actually have the technology to know exactly what they're doing. And the challenge has been that the data they have on you today is old data about who you are. So they'll know you're a white male, you're from Loudoun County, and your GPA was X, and therefore you have an X percentage chance of you're not going to make it just based on where you're coming from. Well, that's great, but again, let's go back to the retail example. Retailers used to guess, okay, I'm a male, I live in Loudoun County, I'm going to want to buy X product. Well, the truth is that's nice to know, but what's better to know is what I was searching on. So Google and Amazon, they know exactly what you're looking for. If you're looking for a car, you're looking for a chair, looking for a bicycle, I don't need to know your profile. Well, that's what's happening in education. I need to know what you're doing in the classroom. And based on, for example, if I put up a lecture and you don't look at it, there's a good chance you're probably not doing the work. If you're answering a lot of questions and you're participating but you're getting the questions wrong, then the right thing to fix it is to give you content that you're missing. If you're leading, then I know you're maybe a class leader and that helps. So that's where big data is going in this whole process. And so that's the other big trend, which is using the computers to generate it. So you can tell, again, hard to see, is in a classroom where we're in there, we know everything. We know their attendance. We know in a class how many questions you asked. We know if you answered any of the questions correctly. So if I post questions, we know how many notes you're taking. We know on which topics. We know down here exactly which slides you didn't like. So if I'm trying to refine my content, we can do that. And then I have a list of the students that might be in danger of not doing well based on the criteria I set as a teacher. So these are the early indicators. So this is kind of where it's going. So if you think about it in the context of everything, it is the digitization happening, but now it's actually happening during the learning moment in class. And as we begin to use computers, both the instructors and the students, we now begin to get the type of data we've never had before, ever. And that's really kind of where the big jump is. And so that kind of leads to, those are kind of the three big themes. And so I wanted to end a little bit with Steve Case, who's one of our investors, talking a little bit about this transition. Because if you walk away from anything apart from the three trends, I also want you to walk away that, particularly in your own businesses, that the internet is coming, it disrupts everything at some time, but it doesn't do it the same way. So not everything's a BlackBerry. A lot of it is transitional, as I said, healthcare and education. And sometimes instead of fighting it, what works best for businesses is actually finding how to make things better and faster. So I'll end with Steve.
Sometimes I worry there's too much focus around what's happening sort of outside the university, away from the university, and not enough focus on what's happening on campus. There's 20,000 campuses around the world, and I think about 100 million students, and that I think should be the main event. How do you use these new technologies to enhance the learning experience on campus? How do you do a better job both before, during, and after class of improving the learning outcomes? And how do we take these new technologies, marry them with what's worked now for decades, in some cases for centuries, to usher in a new era of active learning? Our investment firm, Revolution, says that we really want to revolutionize things and change the way people live their lives. But sometimes revolutions happen in evolutionary ways. And I think that's what's going to happen in higher education. Students of today have grown up as part of this digital generation. That's just part of their life. And they expect their learning experience to build on some of those tools. And what Echo 360's tried to do is put together a suite of tools, a platform of capabilities that each university and each professor can use in the way that they think makes the most sense, both in terms of improving the classroom experience, not just during class, but before class and after class, and what kind of new experiences could be created to reach people who aren't on the campus. It's all possible with the Echo 360 platform. What we really need is the creativity and the innovative spirit of university leaders and professors in the classroom to take these tools and really animate them, give them life. Ultimately, it's about how do you improve the learning experience. Ultimately, it's about how do you take those 100 million students on campuses all around the world and make sure they have better learning experiences in the future because of the Echo 360 active learning platform.
But essentially, that's the way to think about it. So, you know, I hopefully I kick off your innovation theme, and I'm happy to take questions. That it is happening. The schools, and it's a hard transition, but you know, I lived through newspaper wars. I've lived through many industries, and I don't think this is going away. I think the costs and the benefits need to be right-sized. My belief is actually instructors, teachers, and schools have a huge role to play. But what is always the case with disruption is you embrace the technologies and you twist them and use them to your benefit. And that I think that the next 3-4 years are going to be some really huge transition points.